created a ripple effect. The defensive line would get washed out because linebackers weren't filling lanes correctly. The secondary would get exposed because quarterbacks had too much time. Everything connects. And when the middle of your defense isn't solid, nothing else works. That's why this offseason feels different. Because instead of just adding talent, Dallas is trying to fix the foundation. Clapperboard Part 4, the overshown factor. Now let's talk about a player who could quietly define this entire transformation. DeMarvion Overshown. He's not just another linebacker on the roster. He's a centerpiece, a modern linebacker built for today's NFL. Fast enough to cover, physical enough to hit, versatile enough to move around. But here's the key. He needs the right partner next to him. That's where a player like Jordan Brooks becomes so valuable. Because Brooks allows Overshown to play freely. Instead of thinking, he can react. Instead of hesitating, he can attack. And that's when players like Overshown become dangerous. The same goes for someone like Azeez Al-Shaair. Put him next to Overshown, and suddenly you have leadership, instinct, speed, physicality. That's not just an upgrade. That's an identity. Clapperboard Part 5, the business side of football. But building a team isn't just about talent. It's about timing and money. This is where the Cowboys have quietly become smarter. Because in the past, Dallas had a habit of holding on to players too long, paying for past performance instead of future production. That's how you get stuck. That's how rosters become top-heavy. And that's how windows close faster than expected. But this offseason, we're seeing a shift. The decision to move on from Trayvon Diggs is the perfect example. It wasn't emotional. It was calculated. Dallas looked at the trajectory, the injuries, the decline, and they made a decision before it became a bigger problem. That's how good teams operate. And now, they're applying that same logic to the linebacker market. They're not overpaying in free agency. They're not forcing trades. They're waiting for the right opportunity. Because they know value always appears. You just have to be ready to take advantage of it. Clapperboard Part 6, Draft Day Chess Match. Now let's shift forward, because everything Dallas is doing right now is setting up what happens on draft night. 2 first-round picks. That's not just an opportunity. That's leverage, because the Cowboys can go in multiple directions. They can address cornerback early, target an edge rusher, trade up for a premium prospect, or even move back and collect more assets. And here's where it gets interesting. The board may actually fall in their favor. If teams ahead of them prioritize offense, Dallas could see defensive talent slide right into their range. That's how you win drafts. Not by reaching, but by letting the board come to you. And based on current projections, there are several scenarios where Dallas walks away with a starting corner, a rotational edge with high upside, and depth pieces that fit their new system perfectly. Clapperboard Part 7, the 3rd round sweet spot. But don't overlook Day 2, because this is where great teams separate themselves. The 3rd round is where you find players who were overlooked, undervalued, or simply didn't fit every team's system. But for Dallas, these players could be perfect fits. Josiah Trotter is a prime example. He's not flashy. He's not a headline name. But he plays with instinct, with toughness, with purpose. And sometimes, that's exactly what a defense needs. Then there's Jyshawn Barham, a player with upside, a player who can develop into a key contributor in a 3-4 system. And finally, Dominique Orange, a true anchor on the defensive line, the kind of player who doesn't get the spotlight, but makes everyone else better. And if Dallas adds a player like that, it changes everything for the linebackers behind him. Clapperboard Part 8, the big picture. When you step back and look at everything, a clear vision starts to form. The Cowboys aren't just rebuilding their defense. They're reshaping it. From the front, to the middle, to the back. They're getting bigger up front, faster at linebacker, more disciplined in coverage. And most importantly, they're building with purpose. No more patchwork fixes. No more short-term thinking. This is about sustainability. Clapperboard Part 9. What happens next? So now the question becomes, what's the next move? Do the Cowboys pull the trigger on a trade for Jordan Brooks? Do they monitor the situation in Houston and wait for an opening with Azeez Al-Shaair? Or do they trust the draft and build through young talent? The answer might be all of the above, because the best teams don't rely on one path. They create multiple options. And right now, Dallas has options. Clapperboard outro hook to continue part 3+. But here's the scary part for the rest of the league. If the Cowboys get this right, if they land the right linebacker, hit on their draft picks, and fully execute this defensive transition, this team won't just be better, they'll be dangerous. And in the next part, we're going to break down the exact draft scenarios, including dream picks, worst-case outcomes, and one bold move that could completely change everything. To understand where this team is going, you have to understand where it went wrong. Because for years, the Cowboys' defense had talent. Plenty of it. Big names. High draft picks. Playmakers. But something was always missing. Consistency. One week, they dominate. The next week, they collapse. Even though the Cowboys missed out on several linebacker options during the initial wave of free agency, the reality is simple. Their search is far from over. In fact, it may have just entered its most strategic phase. Because what Dallas is doing right now isn't panicking. They're waiting. They're calculating. And they're looking for value where other teams might be forced to make difficult decisions. Earlier in the month, during the chaos of free agency, when money was flying and teams were aggressively reshaping their rosters, there were strong whispers linking Dallas to a potential trade target, Patrick Queen. At first glance, it made sense. A former first-round pick, a player with proven production, a linebacker who, in the right system, can be explosive and disruptive. But there was a catch. Queen was coming off a down season, not just statistically, but in terms of consistency, impact, and overall reliability. And when you combine that with a cap hit north of $17 million, suddenly the situation becomes complicated. Now here's where things get interesting. Pittsburgh, from a financial standpoint, had a potential escape route. By moving Queen in a post-June 1 trade, they could save over $13 million in cap space. That's not small money. That's the kind of flexibility that can reshape a roster. And for a moment, it felt like Dallas might capitalize. But then, the talks cooled. The buzz faded. And just like that, the Cowboys pivoted. Because instead of forcing a move, they shifted their focus to two new names that may actually make more sense in the long run. Jordan Brooks and Azeez Al-Shaair. Let's start with Brooks. At 28 years old, Brooks is right in that sweet spot for linebackers. Experienced but not declining. Physical, but still athletic enough to thrive in modern defensive schemes. He's currently with Miami, a team that's quietly entering a reset phase. Not a full rebuild, but something close to it. Pieces are being moved, contracts are being evaluated, and tough decisions are being made. That's where Brooks comes in. He's in the final year of his deal. And financially, Miami could save over $8 million by moving him after June 1st. So now the question becomes, do they keep a solid linebacker on an expiring contract during a transitional year? Or do they flip him for assets and continue reshaping the roster? For Dallas, the answer is obvious. Brooks isn't just depth. He's a plug-and-play starter. Last season, he graded out as one of the top linebackers in football. Not just good, elite-tier production relative to the position. He diagnoses plays quickly, flows sideline to sideline, and most importantly, he finishes. That's something the Cowboys have been missing. Consistency in the middle. And in a new defensive system that leans toward a 3-4 base, having a reliable presence next to DeMarvion Overshown could completely stabilize the front. Brooks doesn't just fit. He upgrades the entire structure. Now let's talk about the more complicated and arguably more intriguing option, Azeez Al-Shaair. This is where things get tricky, because unlike Brooks, Al-Shaair isn't on a team looking to rebuild. He's part of a defense that's been one of the most respected units in the league. He's a leader, a tone setter, a player who's been consistently productive for years. So why would Houston even consider moving him? The answer is money. It always comes back to money. The Texans are entering a phase where they have to start paying their core players. Extensions are coming, big ones. And when that happens, even valuable contributors can become expendable. Not because they're not good, but because the numbers no longer work. Alshire is due for a new contract, and not just any contract, a top-of-the-market type deal for linebackers. That creates pressure, because once you start allocating that kind of money, you have to be absolutely certain it aligns with your long-term plan. And this is where a team like Dallas becomes dangerous. They're opportunistic, they understand value, and they're not afraid to make a move if the situation presents itself. If Houston hesitates, even slightly, the Cowboys could strike. And if they land a player like Alshire, they're not just filling a hole. They're changing the identity of their defense. But while Dallas is exploring linebacker upgrades, there's another storyline quietly proving they may have already made one of their smartest decisions of the offseason. Moving on from Trayvon Diggs. At the time, it was controversial. Fans questioned it. Critics doubted it. And understandably so, this was once one of the most dangerous ball-hawking corners in the league. But football isn't about what you were. It's about what you are right now. And what Diggs is right now is a player without a team. As free agency has unfolded, the market has spoken. Loudly, clearly. There's been no bidding war, no urgency, no major push from teams looking to bring him in. And that tells you everything you need to know. Because in this league, talent always finds a home, unless that talent no longer matches the expectation. Dallas saw it early. They recognized the decline. They understood the risk. And instead of holding on to hope, they moved on. That's not something this organization has always done well. But this time they got it right. And that decision now looks even better when you consider what's coming next. The draft. This is where everything starts to come together. The Cowboys aren't just entering the draft with needs. They're entering it with opportunity. 2 first-round picks, a clear defensive identity shift, and a front office that seems more aligned than it has been in years. The focus? Defense. Specifically, corners, edge rushers, and versatile front 7 players who can thrive in a multiple 3-4 system. Names are already starting to emerge. At cornerback, there are 2 players consistently being linked to Dallas. Mano or Delane, and German McCoy. Delane is the dream target. Big, physical, scheme versatile, the kind of corner who can match up with top receivers and change how offenses attack. But he may not be easy to get. Draft positioning could complicate things, which is where McCoy comes in. A talented player in his own right, but with some concerns, particularly coming off an ACL injury. Still, the upside is there, and Dallas clearly sees something they like. Then there's the edge group, another critical need. Akeem Asitter is a name gaining traction. Explosive, disruptive, a player who can impact both the run and the pass. But not without questions. Age, injury history, risk factors that Dallas will have to weigh carefully. Behind him, you have players like Malachi Lawrence and T.J. Parker. 2 very different prospects. One flying under the radar, the other carrying early career hype, but both fitting the mold of what Dallas wants to build. Versatility, physicality, intelligence. And as we move deeper into the draft, the 3rd round becomes just as important, because this is where teams often find the glue guys. The players who may not be stars immediately, but become essential pieces over time. For Dallas, the priorities here are clear. Linebacker, front 7 depth, offensive line flexibility. Josiah Trotter stands out as a potential target. Not flashy, but instinctive, physical, the kind of player who can anchor the middle and bring stability to a defense that desperately needs it. Then there's Jyshawn Barham, specifically since the legal tampering window opened, and the Dallas Cowboys have been anything but idle. From the outside looking in, it may seem like just a handful of moves define their offseason so far. But in reality, Dallas has been quietly navigating a complex web of roster decisions, contract situations, and long-term planning for the 2026 season. At first glance, acquisitions involving players like Rashawn Gary, Jalen Thompson, and Kobe Durant bring a sense of excitement and optimism. These are impactful additions, players who can contribute immediately and elevate the defense in meaningful ways. But while those moves grab headlines, they are only a fraction of the story, because beneath the surface, 2 critical situations continue to linger, and they may ultimately define how successful this offseason really is. Those situations revolve around George Pickens and Brandon Aubrey. When the offseason began, the Cowboys knew they had to make decisions regarding both players. Not necessarily final decisions, but strategic ones. Moves that would give them flexibility, time, and leverage. And that's exactly what they did. With Pickens, Dallas applied the non-exclusive franchise tag. It's a powerful tool, one that allows the team to retain control while still leaving the door open for future negotiations. It essentially says, we value you, we want you here, but we're not ready to commit long-term just yet. In Aubrey's case, the Cowboys used a second-round tender, placing his value at $5.76 million for the upcoming season. Again, this is about control and flexibility. It protects the team while buying time to figure out a longer-term solution. But here's the issue. Time doesn't always bring clarity. And right now, clarity is exactly what's missing. According to Calvin Watkins of the Dallas Morning News, the latest updates on both situations are, well, not really updates at all. In fact, the most notable takeaway is that there hasn't been meaningful progress, especially when it comes to George Pickens. No contract talks, no negotiations, no momentum, just silence. That silence speaks volumes. It suggests that Pickens may very well play the entire 2026 season under the franchise tag. And while that's not uncommon in the NFL, it's rarely ideal. For players, it can feel like a lack of long-term commitment. For teams, it creates uncertainty. Of course, things can change. They often do. Between now and training camp, there is still time for discussions to begin, for offers to be made, for agreements to take shape. But there's also a deadline looming, a very real one. By July 15th, the situation will resolve itself one way or another. Either Pickens signs a long-term deal, or he plays on the tag. There is no middle ground. Meanwhile, the situation with Brandon Aubrey is arguably even more confusing. Not because of what's happening now, but because of everything that has already happened. To understand where things stand, you have to go back to the NFL Combine, where the first wave of reports began to surface. Early on, Clarence Hill reported that the Cowboys had made an offer to Aubrey that would make him the highest-paid kicker in the league. At the time, that title belonged to Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs, who was earning an average of $6.4 million per year. That benchmark has since been surpassed by Ka'imi Fairbairn of the Houston Texans, now sitting at $6.5 million annually. So for Dallas to make Aubrey the highest-paid kicker, their offer would have had to exceed that number. But how much higher? That's where things got messy. Reports from ESPN suggested that the Cowboys did indeed offer a deal that surpassed Butker's contract, but that Aubrey's camp was aiming significantly higher, reportedly seeking closer to $10 million per year. That's a massive gap, and it didn't take long for confusion to spread. At one point, Calvin Watkins reported that Dallas had offered Aubrey $7.5 million annually. But that report was later retracted, with Watkins issuing an apology and clarifying that the figure was incorrect. Adding to the uncertainty, Aubrey himself responded to a social media discussion about the report, calling it fake. But even that response was open to interpretation. Was he denying the $7.5 million figure specifically, or the broader narrative around the negotiations? No one really knew, and that ambiguity only deepened the mystery. Clarence Hill later added more context, noting that while the Cowboys did make an offer to make Aubrey the highest-paid kicker, it was not in the $7 million or $7.5 million range. He also revealed that Aubrey's agent countered with a $10 million annual figure, possibly as a strategic move to pause negotiations until both sides could meet in person at the Combine. Since then, nothing concrete, no confirmed numbers, no finalized deal. No clear direction, just a collection of reports, corrections, and unanswered questions. And that brings us back to where things stand today. The Cowboys have made moves. They've improved their roster. They've taken steps to position themselves for success in 2026. But when it comes to George Pickens and Brandon Aubrey, their present is uncertain and their future is unresolved. For now, everything feels like it's on hold, waiting, balancing, treading water. And in the NFL, that kind of uncertainty can either lead to a breakthrough or become a problem. The clock is ticking. The decisions are coming. The only question is, When they finally arrive, will they bring clarity or more chaos? It could make negotiations more practical. But at the same time, trading within the same state and essentially strengthening a rival can complicate things. The Texans would likely demand a strong return, especially for a player coming off a standout season. Then there's Jordan Brooks. Brooks' story is different, but equally compelling. A Texas native, he's deeply connected to the state. He played high school and college football in Texas before being drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. More recently, he's been with the Miami Dolphins, where he elevated his game to another level. Brooks is also coming off a Pro Bowl season, but even more impressive, he earned first-team All-Pro honors. That places him among the elite at his position. He's fast, physical, and versatile, able to defend against both the run and the pass at a high level. And here's where things get interesting. Compared to the Texans, the Dolphins may be in more of a rebuilding phase. That could make Brooks more accessible in trade discussions. If Miami is looking to reshape their roster, they might be willing to part ways with a high-value player in exchange for draft capital or younger assets. For the Cowboys, that presents an opportunity. But this isn't just about choosing between two players. It's about strategy. Dallas is clearly trying to avoid a situation where they're forced into a decision during the draft. In recent years, we've seen teams reach for players, selecting someone earlier than expected because of positional need. And while that can work out, it's always a risk. The Cowboys don't want to be in that position. They don't want to go into the draft needing a linebacker so badly that they feel pressure to take someone like C.J. Allen earlier than they should. Instead, they want flexibility. They want the freedom to take the best player available, regardless of position. And the best way to do that? Solve the linebacker problem before the draft even begins. But there's another layer to this story. What if the Cowboys wait? What if they don't make a move right now, and instead let the draft play out? We've seen this approach before. Last year, Dallas had their eyes on Tetairoa McMillan. They entered the draft hoping he would fall to them. But when he didn't, they had to adjust. Eventually, they addressed the position after the draft by acquiring George Pickens. That situation could repeat itself here. Maybe the Cowboys are interested in a linebacker prospect. Maybe they're hoping someone falls to them. But if that doesn't happen, they could pivot just like they did before and make a trade afterward. It's a flexible approach, but it comes with risks. Waiting too long could mean missing out on key targets. Other teams could step in. Prices could rise. Options could disappear. On the other hand, acting too quickly could lead to overpaying. So the Cowboys are walking a fine line. They're evaluating talent, monitoring the market, and trying to find the perfect balance between urgency and patience. And all of this is happening while fans watch closely, analyzing every rumor, every report, every hint. Because at the end of the day, this decision matters. The linebacker position isn't just another spot on the roster. It's a cornerstone of the defense. Getting it right could elevate the entire team. Getting it wrong could hold them back. So when you look at the options, Alshire or Brooks, it's not just about who's better. It's about fit. It's about cost. It's about timing. Alshire brings consistency and leadership. Brooks brings elite-level performance and upside. Both would improve the Cowboys immediately. But only one, if either, will ultimately wear the star. And that's what makes this story so compelling. The Cowboys are searching. They're calculating. They're preparing to make a move. The only question is, when they finally do, will it be the right one? Their storyline started to build, and this one had the potential to completely shake up everything we thought we knew about Dallas offseason plans, because suddenly there were whispers, reports, and quiet hints coming from around the league that a blockbuster move, one that had already failed once, might not be dead after all. And at the center of it all was one name that immediately grabbed attention, one of the most feared pass rushers in the NFL, Max Crosby, because just weeks ago, it looked like Crosby was gone, traded from the Las Vegas Raiders to the Baltimore Ravens in a massive deal that included 2 first-round picks, a price that told you exactly how valuable he is, exactly how dominant he can be when he's at his best. But then everything changed because that deal fell apart, abruptly rescinded after. Medical concerns raised red flags, specifically surrounding Crosby's knee after meniscus surgery. And just like that, one of the biggest trades of the offseason vanished, leaving Crosby back in Las Vegas, but not in the same situation as before because now there's context, now there's tension, now there's the reality that the team was willing to move him. And that changes everything because even if Crosby says he's happy, even if the Raiders publicly commit to moving forward together, the door is no longer fully closed, it's just slightly pushed open. And that's where the Cowboys enter the conversation again, because before Baltimore stepped in with that massive offer, Dallas was right there, seen as one of the top contenders to land Crosby. But they weren't willing to go as far as giving up 2 first-round picks, and that hesitation cost them. But now, with the original deal collapsed, there's been growing speculation that maybe, just maybe, the Cowboys could circle back this time with a more calculated, more conservative offer, trying to take advantage of a situation where Crosby's value might be complicated by health concerns and team dynamics. And for a moment, that idea created real excitement among fans because adding a player like Crosby would instantly transform the Cowboys' defense, giving them a relentless, high-motor pass rusher who can take over games, who can pressure quarterbacks, disrupt defenses, and change outcomes in critical moments. But as quickly as that excitement started to build, reality began to settle in, because behind the scenes, the Cowboys had already made a decision, and it wasn't the one fans were hoping for, because instead of staying aggressive in the pass rusher market, instead of chasing another blockbuster move, Dallas pivoted, stepping away not just from Crosby, but from the entire idea of adding a star pass rusher through trades or free agency. And that decision became even clearer when they chose not to pursue players like Trey Hendrickson, another high-level pass rusher who could have filled a major need. And instead, they made a quieter, more controlled move, trading a future 4th-round pick for Rashawn Gary from the Green Bay Packers, a player who has shown flashes of elite pass-rushing ability, but has also dealt with inconsistency over the past few seasons. And that move tells you a lot about how the Cowboys are thinking right now. Because it's not about making the biggest splash, it's about managing risk, it's about finding value, and most importantly, it's about keeping their draft capital intact because according to reports, including insights from insiders like Calvin Watkins, the Cowboys are officially out on the Max Crosby situation, even after the failed Baltimore deal reopened the conversation. And that's significant because it confirms that Dallas is committed to a different path, a path that leans heavily on the upcoming draft to address their remaining needs on the defensive line. And when you really break it down, that approach starts to make sense because as talented as Crosby is, there are real concerns that come with him right now. And those concerns start with his health because knee issues, especially ones involving meniscus surgery, are not something teams take lightly, particularly when you're talking about giving up premium assets like first-round picks. And that's exactly where the Raiders are holding firm because despite everything that's happened, despite the failed trade, despite the uncertainty, Las Vegas is not lowering their asking price. They still want that same massive return, and that creates a major problem for any team considering a move. Because now you're not just evaluating the player, you're evaluating the risk, the long-term durability, the possibility that you give up everything and then don't get the full version of the player you paid for. And that's a gamble that can set a franchise back years if it goes wrong. And it's exactly why teams, including the Cowboys, are hesitant to re-engage because even though the idea of adding Crosby is exciting, even though the upside is undeniable, the downside is just as real. And for a team like Dallas that is trying to build sustainably, that is trying to balance immediate competitiveness with long-term stability, the kind of risk might simply be too much. And so, instead of chasing uncertainty, the Cowboys are choosing control, choosing patience, choosing to trust their ability to identify and develop talent through the draft. And that brings everything full circle, because whether it's linebacker, pass rusher, or secondary help, the Cowboys are clearly signaling that the future of this team will be built through those picks, through smart decisions, through calculated risks rather than desperate swings. And while that approach may not generate the same level of excitement as a blockbuster trade, it might ultimately be what gives Dallas the best chance to build a complete, balanced, and sustainable contender. But of course, in the NFL, plans can change quickly, opportunities can appear out of nowhere, and until the draft is over and the season begins, nothing is ever truly final, which means that even if the Cowboys are out on Max Crosby today, The story might not be completely over, but for now the message is clear. Dallas is moving forward with a different vision, one that prioritizes flexibility, discipline, and long-term success over short-term headlines. And whether that decision proves to be the right one is something we won't fully understand until the games begin. The defense. And that's not just